A billionaire saw a boy reading How to Find My Father in an airport. That boy was his son. And for 11 years, he didn't even know the child existed. Not because the mother hid him, but because 12 years earlier, when she left, the father never asked the one question that would have changed everything. Is there a reason you left? This is the story of what silence costs and what it takes to earn back time you can't buy. The boy's book had 5 words on the cover. 5 words that stopped a billionaire mid-stride. 5 words that proved Michael Johnson didn't know everything after all. How to Find My Father. Michael Johnson had spent 30 years learning to read people. He could spot fear across a glass boardroom table, could hear lies buried inside the most confident voices, could predict market crashes 6 months before they hit the front page of the Wall Street Journal. But the boy sitting alone at gate 47, knees pulled to his chest, sneakers scuffed at the toes, a worn paperback balanced carefully in both hands, stopped Michael like he'd walked into a wall he didn't see coming. Not because the boy looked familiar, but because of that title. The world around Michael. Rolling suitcases, clattering over tile. Gate agents announcing delays. His 2 assistants trailing 3 steps behind, with phones pressed to their ears. All of it blurred into static. His eyes locked on the book cover, then on the boy's face. Dark eyes. Serious. Too focused for a child his age. The kind of focus Michael recognized because he'd worn it himself at boardroom tables when everyone was waiting for him to fail. And then something happened that Michael couldn't explain. He saw her. Elvia. Not literally. The boy wasn't Elvia, but something in the shape of his mouth, the way he held his shoulders, the particular way his fingers gripped that book, like it contained answers he desperately needed. Michael's chest tightened. Not panic. Not fear. Recognition that didn't make sense yet. His assistant, Margie, touched his elbow. Michael, the car's waiting. We'll miss the... Give me a minute. Michael didn't move. Couldn't. The boy turned a page. Slow, careful, like every word mattered. And Michael thought about a name he hadn't spoken out loud in 12 years. Elvia Perry. The woman who'd been there before the Forbes covers and the CNBC interviews. Before the private jets and the penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She'd slept on office couches with him, edited pitch decks at 2 in the morning while he paced and rewrote slides, believed in him when venture capitalists thought he was delusional. And then she'd broken him. The cheating wasn't a rumor. It wasn't something he'd overheard or suspected or pieced together from vague clues. It was confirmed. Emails left open on a shared laptop. Dates that lined up exactly with nights she'd said she was working late. A name Michael recognized. James. Someone from his own inner circle. The betrayal had landed at the exact moment Michael needed loyalty most. 3 weeks before the biggest pitch of his life. The one that would determine whether his company became a billion-dollar empire or just another failed startup forgotten by Friday. Michael never screamed. He'd simply gone silent. Elvia had cried, begged, tried to explain how lonely she'd felt while he disappeared into 18-hour workdays and forgot to come home. How she'd made a mistake. How it didn't mean anything. How she still loved him. Michael had listened. Then he'd said only one thing. Take whatever you need. Leave tonight. She'd walked away from the penthouse, from the company, from the future they'd planned in late-night conversations when they were too tired to lie to each other. And Michael told himself he'd won. He buried himself in work, closed the funding round, took the company public, made his first billion by the time he was 34. Elvia became a name he didn't say, A chapter he'd closed. A problem he'd solved by simply removing it from his life. That was 12 years ago. And now, at gate 47 in an airport he'd been through 100 times before, Michael stood frozen, watching a boy read a book about finding his father. A gate agent's voice cut through the noise. "Darren Perry? Darren Perry, please approach the counter." The boy looked up, marked his page with a torn piece of paper, stood, and walked toward the desk with his backpack slung over one shoulder. Perry. That surname hit Michael like a delayed explosion. The sound came first, then the meaning, then the implications that followed like aftershocks. Perry, Elvia's last name. Michael's hands went cold. He told himself it was coincidence. Common name, lots of Perrys in the world. Didn't mean anything. But his feet didn't move. He watched the boy speak quietly to the gate agent, watched him nod, watched him return to his seat and reopen that book to the exact page he'd marked. Margie's voice again, more urgent now. "Michael, we really need to. Change of plans," Michael said. "Cancel the San Francisco meeting. I'm staying in the city tonight." "What? But you have the reschedule it." He didn't wait for her response. Michael walked to the nearest coffee shop, ordered something he didn't taste, and sat at a table with a clear view of gate 47. He watched the boy read for 40 minutes, watched him board when his flight was called, watched the gate agent close the door. And then Michael sat alone in an airport terminal, holding cold coffee, thinking about a woman he'd erased from his life, and a boy whose age aligned perfectly with the year she disappeared. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He sat in his hotel suite, 23rd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, city lights stretching into darkness, and opened his laptop. He typed 2 words into the search bar. Elvia Perry. The results loaded slowly, too slowly. And then he saw it. A small nonprofit organization. Community. Outreach. After-school programs for underserved kids. Modest funding. 1 staff photo on the website. Elvia, older now, hair shorter, smile smaller, but unmistakably her. And next to her in the photo, wearing a volunteer t-shirt that was too big for him, stood a boy. Dark eyes, serious expression, maybe 11 or 12 years old. The caption read, "Elvia Perry, founder, with son Darren." Michael stared at that photo until the screen went dark. Then he pulled up a calendar, counted backwards. The math was simple. Elvia had left in October 2012. If the boy was 11 now, that meant he was born around August 2013, 9 months after she walked away. Michael's hands started shaking, not from anger, not from shock, from the realization that he'd spent 12 years winning, building, conquering, and he'd missed the most important thing that had ever happened to him. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in that hotel suite with the lights off and the city glowing below him, holding his phone, staring at Elvia's nonprofit website, reading the same paragraph over and over. Every child deserves someone who shows up, not just once, but every single day. And for the first time in 12 years, Michael Johnson, who could predict markets and read people and build empires, had absolutely no idea what to do next. Because you can't buy back time. You can't negotiate with years you missed. And you can't fix what you didn't know was broken. But Michael knew one thing with absolute certainty. That boy at gate 47 wasn't reading a book about finding some abstract father. He was reading a book about finding him. And Michael had been missing for 11 years. The question wasn't whether Michael would find him. The question was whether he deserved to be found. 12 years earlier, Michael Johnson had everything except the one thing that mattered. He just didn't know it yet. It was 2012, and the company didn't have a name that mattered. Not yet. It was just lines of code, caffeine-fueled all-nighters, and a whiteboard covered in Elvia's handwriting. Michael could still remember the exact smell of that office. Cold pizza left in boxes on the conference table at 3 in the morning. The burnt coffee scent from a pot that had been reheated 4 times. The faint vanilla from whatever lotion Elvia used that lingered in the air after she'd fallen asleep on the couch for the 3rd night that week. They weren't building a company. They were building everything. Elvia would sit cross-legged on the floor, laptop balanced on her knees, editing pitch decks, while Michael paced behind her, rewriting slides in real time. "That sentence is too long," she'd say without looking up. "Investors stop reading after 12 words. It's 11 words. It feels like 15. And she'd be right. She was always right about those things. Michael would code until sunrise. Elvia would wake up on the office couch at 6, make coffee that tasted like diesel fuel, and read him the news headlines that would affect their market projections. She believed in him before anyone else did. Before the venture capitalists stopped laughing at his pitch. Before the tech blogs wrote articles that didn't end with question marks. Before the board existed. There was a specific moment Michael remembered with perfect clarity. The company valuation hit $847 million on a Tuesday afternoon in September 2012. They'd been in the office, alone. The rest of the team had gone home hours ago. Michael's laptop pinged with the notification. He stared at the number, refreshed the page 3 times to make sure it was real. Elvia looked over his shoulder. "Holy shit," she whispered. "Yeah, we did it. We're close. Michael." She turned his chair around so he faced her. "We did it." And for the first time in 3 years, Michael let himself believe her. They weren't just building a company. They were building a future. At least that's what Michael believed. But while Michael was building empires, Elvia was disappearing into loneliness he never noticed. The late nights became later. The office couch became her permanent bed. And Michael became someone who spoke in timelines and projections instead of sentences that included her name. He didn't see it happening. Didn't see the way she stopped asking him to come home. Didn't see the way she stopped editing his slides and just sent them back with "looks good." Didn't see the exact moment she gave up on being seen. The discovery came on a Thursday, October 11th, 2012. Michael would remember that date for the rest of his life. He'd been working on their shared laptop, the old one they'd used since the beginning. Elvia had borrowed it that morning for a meeting. She'd left her email open. Michael wasn't looking for anything, wasn't suspicious, wasn't the kind of man who checked phones or read private messages. But the subject line was right there at the top of the screen. "Last night was exactly what I needed." From James Cardwell, Michael's director of business development, the guy he'd hired 6 months ago, the one Elvia had recommended. Michael's hand hovered over the touchpad. He told himself to close it, to respect her privacy, to trust her. He clicked. The email thread loaded. 23 messages, dates that went back 5 weeks. Every single one aligned perfectly with nights Elvia had said she was working late or meeting with potential partners. The messages weren't ambiguous. They weren't friendly colleague banter. They were detailed, specific, explicit. Michael read 3 of them. Then he closed the laptop, stood up, walked to the window, and felt something inside him go completely, dangerously silent. He didn't scream, didn't throw the laptop across the room, didn't call her, didn't call James. He just stood there, 23 stories above the city, watching traffic move like blood through arteries, and felt the future he'd believed in collapse into something unrecognizable. Elvia came back 2 hours later. She was carrying takeout, Thai food from the place they always ordered from. She was smiling, tired, but smiling. I got your usual, she said, setting the bag on the desk. Extra spicy, no peppers, because apparently you hate flavor, but love pain. Michael didn't turn around. I saw the emails. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. Michael counted. Michael, how long? It's not... How long, Elvia? Her voice came out smaller. 5 weeks. With James? Yes. In our office? Silence. Answer me. Twice, she whispered. Michael finally turned around. Elvia's face was pale. Her hands were shaking. She looked like someone who'd been caught holding evidence she couldn't explain away. I can explain, she said. I was lonely. You were gone all the time. You stopped seeing me, stopped hearing me. I felt invisible, Michael. And he what? Michael's voice was perfectly calm, perfectly controlled. He saw you? He made you feel special? He gave you what I couldn't? Michael, please. As if loneliness justified demolition. It was a mistake, Elvia said, and she was crying now. Full tears streaming down her face. It didn't mean anything. I love you. I love what we built. I just needed... Take whatever you need, Michael said. Leave tonight. The words came out so quietly she almost didn't hear them. What? Tonight, Elvia. Michael, we can talk about this. We can go to therapy. We can... Tonight. She stared at him, waiting for him to yell, to break something, to give her anger she could fight against. But Michael just looked at her with eyes that had already erased her. I'll pack, she finally whispered. She left at 11:47 p.m., took 2 suitcases and her laptop, left her key on the kitchen counter. Michael didn't watch her go. He sat at his desk and opened a new spreadsheet, started running projections for Q4, calculated market expansion scenarios, answered emails from investors, as if nothing had happened, because nothing had happened. He'd simply removed a problem, and problems once removed stopped existing. What Michael didn't know, what he wouldn't discover for 12 more years, was that Elvia was already carrying the consequence. She'd find out the next day, October 12th, 2012. One positive pregnancy test in a gas station bathroom, hands shaking so hard she could barely read the result. And Michael would be unreachable. Not because he'd blocked her number, but because he'd told Kendra, his assistant, his gatekeeper, his fiercely loyal defender, to handle Elvia and make sure she stays gone. Kendra took that instruction seriously. Every call blocked, every email filtered to spam, every attempt at contact erased before it reached him. Michael buried himself in work. The company hit $1 billion 18 months later. Forbes cover, Wall Street Journal profile, CNBC interviews where hosts called him a visionary and the future of tech. Perfect revenge. Perfect victory. He won. Or so he thought. But victories built on silence have a way of collecting interest. And 12 years later, sitting in a hotel suite at 3:47 a.m., staring at a photo of a boy who had his jawline and his sister's freckles and his own serious expression, Michael finally understood the price. He hadn't won. He'd just been losing slowly enough not to notice. You know what's interesting about the stories that matter most? They're never really about the moment someone leaves. They're about what gets left unsaid. And if you've ever had words stuck in your throat for years, words you should have said, apologies you should have made, questions you should have asked, then you understand what happens next. Stay with this story, because what Michael learns might just change how you see your own silence. And if this story is already hitting close to home, subscribe, because the women in this community, we've all carried secrets too heavy to name. Michael sat in that hotel room until sunrise. And when his phone rang at 6:15 a.m., with Margie asking about the rescheduled meetings, Michael said something he hadn't said in 12 years. Cancel everything for the next 2 weeks. Everything? I need to find someone. He didn't say who, but he knew exactly where to start. Michael hired the private investigators on a Wednesday. Not for revenge, not to build a case, not to weaponize information, for confirmation, for the answer to a question he should have asked 12 years ago. The report arrived 3 weeks later in a manila envelope delivered to his office at 9:23 a.m. Michael stared at it for 6 minutes before opening it. Inside, 47 pages of a life he'd missed entirely. Darren Marcus Perry, D.O.B., August 14, 2013. Mother, Elvia Catherine Perry. Father, unknown, per birth certificate. School records from Lincoln Elementary. Honor roll every semester. Teacher notes. Exceptional in science and mathematics. Quiet. Keeps to himself. Asks thoughtful questions. Medical records. Routine checkups. No major illnesses. Allergies. None. Height and weight tracking that showed a boy growing steadily, normally, without Michael ever knowing he existed. A library card from the public branch on Maple Street. Check-out history, spanning 3 years. Books about astronomy, physics, engineering. And one title that appeared 17 times over 6 months. How to Find My Father. But it was the photo that stopped Michael cold. Darren at a science fair. Maybe 10 years old in the picture. Standing next to a model of the solar system. He'd clearly built himself. Planets suspended on wire, painted with careful detail. Saturn's rings cut from what looked like recycled plastic. The boy stood with his weight shifted onto his left foot. Exactly the way Michael stood during presentations. Michael set the report down on his desk, picked up the photo, and stared at it for 47 minutes without moving. He counted the freckles across Darren's nose. 7. The same. Pattern his sister Rachel had. The same pattern Michael's mother had in old photographs from the 70s. He traced the jawline with his eyes. Sharp, defined. The Johnson family jaw that his father always said looked good on men and made women look distinguished. He studied the way Darren's mouth was set, not quite smiling, not quite serious, like someone who'd learned early that showing too much of what you felt was dangerous. This wasn't a business problem. Couldn't be solved with contracts or buyouts or aggressive negotiation tactics. This was blood, legacy, time that had passed without him. The one thing Michael's $1 billion couldn't buy back. He drafted the email at 4:36 p.m., deleted it, rewrote it at 5:12 p.m., deleted it again. Finally, at 6:03 p.m., he typed 4 sentences and hit send before he could overthink it. Elvia, I saw Darren at an airport 3 weeks ago. I know he's my son. We need to talk about Darren. Michael professional. Brief. No accusations. No demands. Her response came 6 hours later. Michael's phone pinged at 12:47 a.m. While he was reviewing quarterly projections, he wasn't actually reading. I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Coffee, Thursday, 10 a.m., brew and bean on 5th. You probably don't remember it. Heed that line. When you'd figure it out. Not if. Michael expected anger. Expected her to refuse to see him. Expected lawyers and custody demands and battles over parental rights. He got something worse. Her calm. Like she'd been waiting. Like she'd known this confrontation was inevitable. Like she'd already made peace with it years ago. Thursday morning arrived with rain that turned the city gray and cold. Michael wore jeans and a sweater. Left his watch in the hotel room. Told Margie he was unavailable until further notice. Brew and Bean was exactly the kind of place Michael would never choose. Worn vinyl booths with duct tape covering the cracks. Fluorescent lights that hummed too loud. Laminated menus sticky with syrup. Coffee that cost $2 and came in chipped ceramic mugs. Elvia was already there when he arrived. She sat in a corner booth, hands wrapped around a mug, staring out the rain-streaked window. Michael stopped 3 steps inside the door. She looked older, not in a way that made her look tired or worn down. Older, in a way that made her look like she'd survived something difficult and come out stronger because of it. Her hair was shorter, streaks of gray at the temples she hadn't tried to hide, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 12 years ago. But her posture was straighter. Her expression was calmer, like someone who'd learned to carry weight without breaking. She looked up. Their eyes met. And for exactly 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Then Elvia gestured to the seat across from her. Michael sat. A waitress appeared with coffee he didn't remember ordering. He wrapped his hands around the mug just to have something to hold. "You look the same," Elvia said quietly. "You don't. I've had 11 years to grow up. You've had 11 years to build an empire." She said it without bitterness, just observation. "How did you find out?" "Airport, gate 47. He was reading a book about finding his father." Something flickered across Elvia's face. Pain, maybe, or recognition. "He bought that book 8 months ago," she said. "I tried to talk to him about it. He said he was just curious." "Were you ever going to tell me?" "Yes," Elvia said immediately. "I tried." "When?" "The day after you told me to leave. And the day after that. And every day for 3 months, until I realized your assistant was making sure I never got through." Michael's chest tightened. "Kendra, she told me I was another distraction trying to derail you, that you'd given specific instructions to keep me away, that if I really cared about you, I'd let you focus on what mattered." And that's when Michael remembered. That exact conversation. October 12th, 2012. The morning after Elvia left. Kendra had asked, "What do you want me to do if she contacts you?" Michael had said, "Handle it. Make sure she stays gone." He'd weaponized his own gatekeepers. "You could have shown up," Michael said, but his voice had no force behind it. "You could have come to the office." "I did. Twice. Security wouldn't let me pass the lobby without an appointment. And your calendar was suddenly unavailable to me." Michael had no response to that. "You kept my son from me," he finally said, "for 11 years. I found out I was pregnant the day after you told me to leave." The words landed heavy and final. Michael opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "You still could have." "I tried, Michael." Elvia's voice didn't rise, didn't shake, just stayed perfectly, devastatingly calm. "I tried for 3 months, and then I had to make a choice. Keep trying to reach someone who'd made it clear I was erased, or protect my son from becoming collateral damage in your empire." "Our son. My son," Elvia corrected. "You don't get to claim fatherhood by biology alone. He doesn't know you. You don't know him. You've never been to a school play, or a doctor's appointment, or a birthday party. You've never sat up with him when he had nightmares. You've never taught him to read, or helped him with homework, or listened to him explain why he loves astronomy." Michael felt something crack in his chest. "That wasn't my choice." "It wasn't mine either." Elvia leaned forward. "I made a mistake, Michael. The worst kind. I cheated on you. I broke your trust. I destroyed what we had. And I've spent 11 years living with that. But Darren? He's not my mistake. He's my redemption." She paused. Let those words settle. "So before you walk in with lawyers and custody demands and threats about parental rights, understand this. I didn't keep him from you out of spite. I kept him from becoming a pawn in whatever war you were fighting with the world." Michael stared at her. And for the first time in 12 years, he saw Elvia clearly. She wasn't the villain he'd spent a decade erasing from his story. She was the woman who'd survived his silence, who'd raised a son alone, who'd built a life from the wreckage of their ending. She wasn't hiding Darren. She was protecting him. I want to meet him, Michael said quietly. Properly. Why? Because he's my son. That's biology. I'm asking about intention. Why do you want to meet him? To ease your guilt? To claim him like an asset you just discovered? To add father to your list of accomplishments? Because I saw him reading that book, Michael said. And I realized I've spent 12 years winning everything except the thing that mattered. Elvia studied him for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone, typed something, set it face down on the table. I'll talk to him, she said. I'll ask if he wants to meet you. But Michael, if you do this, you show up. Not once. Not when it's convenient. You show up consistently. Because Darren has spent his entire life learning that fathers are the people who leave. And I won't let you confirm that lesson. I'll show up. Promise is just a word. Proof takes time. She stood, left a $5 bill on the table, paused before walking away. He's brilliant, loves astronomy, hates loud voices, reads at a 12th grade level, takes his coffee with too much sugar, even though I tell him it's basically candy, and he's been looking for you his whole life without ever saying it out loud. Her voice softened. Don't make him regret finding you. She left. Michael sat alone in a booth with bad coffee and fluorescent lights humming overhead, and realized that the hardest conversation wasn't the one he just had with Elvia. It was the one coming next, with a boy who'd been searching for a father, and a man who'd been missing for 11 years. Saturday morning arrived cold and clear. Michael stood outside the public library at 9:42 a.m., 18 minutes early, wearing jeans he'd bought specifically for this meeting and a sweater that felt wrong the moment he put it on. He felt like an imposter, like someone playing the role of casual father in a movie where everyone could see through the costume. The library was nothing like the buildings Michael usually inhabited. No glass walls or marble floors or security desks staffed by people in suits. Just worn brick, a handicap ramp with chipped paint, and double doors that stuck when you pulled them open. Inside, the smell of old books and floor polish. That particular scent that only exists in libraries. Paper aging slowly, industrial cleaner trying to mask decades of use, the faint mustiness of carpet that had absorbed too many rainy days. Michael walked past the front desk, where a librarian looked up, recognized him, did a double take, then pretended she hadn't. The children's section was in the back corner. Murals covered the walls, painted dinosaurs with friendly faces, rocket ships blasting off toward crayon stars, a solar system where Saturn's rings were 3 different shades of yellow. Michael sat at a too small table, clearly designed for elementary school students. His knees hit the underside immediately. He adjusted, tried crossing his legs. That was worse. Finally settled for sitting at an angle that made him look like someone who'd never sat in a chair before. 9:58 a.m. Michael checked his phone, put it away, checked it again. 10 a.m. Footsteps, 2 sets, one confident, one hesitant. Michael stood too fast. The chair scraped loud against linoleum. Darren walked in with Elvia close behind. The boy was taller than Michael expected, almost to Elvia's shoulder, wearing a hoodie with a NASA logo and jeans with a hole in one knee, sneakers that had been white once but were now gray with use. He saw Michael, didn't run, didn't smile, didn't show any emotion at all, just looked. Michael's chest tightened. He'd pitched to hostile venture capitalists who wanted him to fail, negotiated with billionaires who played mind games for sport, faced down corporate raiders trying to gut his company for parts. None of it prepared him for an 11-year-old's neutral handshake. Michael extended his hand. Darren, I know who you are, the boy said quietly. Mom showed me articles. His voice was softer than Michael expected. Careful, like someone who'd learned to measure his words before speaking them. They shook hands. Darren's grip was measured. Not too firm, not too weak. Like he'd practiced this exact interaction in his head multiple times. "Can I sit?" Darren asked. "Of course, yeah, please." They sat. Elvia took a chair slightly behind Darren, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to give them space. Silence stretched between them. Michael had prepared for this, had mentally rehearsed conversation starters, questions that would make Darren feel comfortable, icebreakers that would ease the tension. Every single one evaporated from his mind. "So," Michael finally tried, "I hear you like science. Astronomy specifically," Darren said, "and engineering. That's incredible. I could show you our company's tech labs. We're working on some really cutting edge." "I don't need your labs." The words weren't hostile, just factual, like Darren was correcting a basic misunderstanding. Silence again. Michael glanced at Elvia. She gave him nothing, no help, no rescue. This was his to navigate. "Right," Michael said. "Of course. I just thought, can I ask you something?" Darren interrupted. "Anything. Why didn't you ever look for me?" The question landed like a physical blow. Michael had prepared an answer for this, had workshopped it with himself during the sleepless nights since the coffee shop. A careful explanation about not knowing, about Elvia leaving, about communication breakdowns. All of it evaporated. Michael's voice came out wrong. "I didn't know you existed." "But you never asked." Darren's tone didn't change. Still quiet, still measured. "After Mom left, you never once asked if there was a reason." And that's when Michael understood. This wasn't about wealth or access or tech labs or anything money could solve. It was about the question he never thought to ask. The possibility he never considered. The follow-up he never made because he'd been too busy winning. "You're right," Michael said quietly. "I didn't ask, and I should have." Darren nodded once, like Michael had confirmed something he already knew. Michael noticed the backpack at Darren's feet, the corner of a book peeking out from the unzipped pocket. "The book I saw you reading," Michael said. "At the airport. How to Find My Father." "Is that, Darren reached down, pulled it out. The cover was more worn than Michael remembered. Bent corners, creased spine. The kind of wear that comes from being read multiple times, carried everywhere, opened and reopened. "It's not about finding rich dads," Darren said. "It's about why they leave. And if they ever come back." He opened it to a page marked with a torn piece of notebook paper. Showed Michael a highlighted passage. "Absence isn't always abandonment. Sometimes it's just the space between not knowing and understanding." "Do you understand?" Darren asked. "Why you weren't there?" Michael wanted to say yes, wanted to offer a clean explanation that would make sense to an 11-year-old, wanted to promise that everything would be different now. But Elvia's look stopped him. Some debts can't be paid in one conversation. "I'm starting to," Michael said honestly, "but I think understanding takes longer than one Saturday morning." Darren considered this. "Okay. Can I," Michael hesitated, "can I see you again? If you want?" Darren shrugged. "If you want." Not rejection, not acceptance. Something worse. Indifference. The meeting lasted 47 minutes. They talked about school. Darren's favorite subject was physics. Least favorite was gym. About astronomy. Darren wanted to be an astrophysicist or maybe an aerospace engineer. He hadn't decided yet. About books, Darren read everything, but especially liked science fiction that got the science right. Michael learned that Darren took his coffee with too much sugar. that he chewed the inside of his cheek when he was thinking, that he rearranged items on tables into straight lines without realizing he was doing it. Small details, surface facts, nothing that felt like connection. When Elvia finally said they needed to go, Darren had a project due Monday. The boy stood, shouldered his backpack, and extended his hand again. Another practiced handshake. "Thank you for meeting me," Darren said. Polite, formal, like thanking a teacher after class. "Thank you for giving me the chance." Darren nodded, started to leave, then turned back. "Michael?" "Yeah?" "The book says fathers leave for lots of reasons, but they only come back for one." "What's that?" "Because they want to." Darren looked at him with dark eyes that were too serious for 11 years old. "Do you want to?" Michael felt his throat close. "Yes." "Okay." That was all. Just okay. Then Darren walked away with Elvia, and Michael sat alone at a too-small table in a children's section decorated with friendly dinosaurs, feeling like he'd just failed a test he didn't know he was taking. Here's what Michael didn't understand yet, and maybe you've learned this the hard way yourself. Children don't care about explanations. They care about presence. And if you've ever tried to rebuild trust with someone you hurt, you know it's not about grand gestures. It's about showing up when it's uncomfortable. If this story is reminding you of someone you need to show up for, leave a comment. Tell me who. Sometimes naming it is the first step. And hit that like button if you're feeling this. It tells me you're ready for where this goes next. Because what comes next? It's where Michael learns that showing up once is easy. Showing up every day is the hardest thing he'll ever do. 3 months. That's how long it took for Michael to learn that showing up wasn't a single decision. It was 1,000 small decisions made every single day. Tuesday afternoons, 3:15 p.m. Lincoln Elementary pickup line. Michael's black sedan looked absurd, parked between minivans covered in honors student bumper stickers and SUVs with soccer equipment visible through the back windows. Week 1, Darren walked past without acknowledging him. Week 2, Darren nodded once, kept walking. Week 3, Darren got in the car, said thanks for the ride in a voice that sounded like he was reading from a script. Week 12, Darren got in, tossed his backpack in the back seat, and said, "We're studying planetary motion in science. Mr. Henderson says I should consider entering the regional competition." Progress measured in sentences. The science fair setup happened on a Friday afternoon in late February. Michael arrived at the school gymnasium carrying nothing, knowing nothing. Useful for nothing. Other parents assembled tri-fold boards with power drills and expert precision. They knew where things went, how foam core attached, which glue worked best. Michael held Darren's poster board while the boy carefully mounted printed photos of exoplanets. They didn't speak much, but when Darren needed tape, Michael had it ready. When a corner wouldn't stick, Michael held it in place for 11 minutes while the adhesive set. Small acts, silent partnership. Saturday mornings became library mornings. 9 a.m. Same table in the children's section where they'd first met. They read side by side, not together, not the same books, not sharing observations. Just two people occupying the same space. Michael learned things during those months that quarterly reports had never taught him. He learned Darren took his coffee with too much sugar, 3 packets in a small cup, turning it into something closer to candy than caffeine. He learned Darren chewed his pencil when thinking through difficult problems. Always the eraser end, always the left side. He learned Darren rearranged his backpack 3 times before leaving anywhere. Books stacked by size, pencil case in the front pocket, water bottle on the left side. A ritual performed unconsciously, like a pilot running through a pre-flight checklist. Small details billionaires don't notice, but fathers do. In week 4, Elvia set a new condition. You show up for family therapy. With Ruth. Non-negotiable. Michael started to negotiate. Therapy felt like admitting failure publicly. Like putting his inadequacy on record. Non-negotiable, Michael. He went. Ruth's office was nothing like the sleek executive spaces Michael inhabited. Worn couch with throw pillows that had seen better days. Bookshelves packed with titles about trauma and healing and family systems. A diffuser releasing lavender scent that was supposed to be calming but just made Michael aware he was somewhere that required calming. Ruth herself was mid-60s with kind eyes that saw too much and a voice that never rushed. First session. Darren sat on one end of the couch, Michael on the other, Elvia in a chair to the side, present but not participating. Ruth looked at Michael. Michael, Darren's been coming here for 8 months. He has questions about abandonment and trust. Are you ready to hear them? Yes. Are you ready to not have answers? Michael opened his mouth, closed it. I don't know. That's honest. Ruth turned to Darren. What do you want your father to understand? Darren was quiet for so long, Michael thought he wouldn't answer. Then softly, that I don't hate him. I just don't know him. And that's scary. Michael's chest tightened. Scary how? Darren looked down at his hands, picked at a loose thread on his jeans. Because what if I need you someday, and you leave again? It's safer if I don't need you at all. The words landed like blows. Michael had built empires on strategy, on reading situations and adjusting tactics, on controlling variables and minimizing risk. This required something he'd never learned: surrender. I'm not leaving, Michael said. Ruth raised a hand gently. Darren, do you believe that? No. One word, delivered without hesitation. Michael felt something crack inside him. What would it take, Michael asked, for you to believe me? Time, Darren said simply, and not breaking promises, which made what happened in week 11 so much worse. Darren's astronomy presentation was scheduled for Thursday, April 18th at 6:30 p.m. Michael marked it on his calendar in red. Set 3 alarms, confirmed with Elvia twice, told Margie to block his entire evening. This is non-negotiable, he told her. I don't care what comes up. At 4:47 p.m. on April 18th, Clayton called. Tokyo investors are pulling out. Conference call in 15 minutes. If we don't salvage this, we lose $200 million in funding. Michael looked at his calendar. At the red block marked Darren. Astronomy. Presentation. Reschedule it. Michael, they're pulling the offer at midnight Tokyo time. That's in 7 hours. Then handle it. They want to hear from you, specifically you. They don't trust the interim CEO. Michael felt the familiar pull, the one that had ruled his life for 20 years, the certainty that if he wasn't in the room, everything would collapse. Just this once, he told himself. One meeting. He called Elvia. I'm going to be a little late. Board crisis. I'll be there as soon as... Don't. It's just one meeting. Michael, don't do this. I'll be there. I promise. Just 30 minutes late. The call went until 7:45 p.m. By the time Michael arrived at the school, the gymnasium was empty except for janitors breaking down tables. He'd missed it entirely. Elvia's text arrived at 8:47 p.m. He waited for you in the hallway for 40 minutes after it ended, just in case you were late instead of absent. Michael stared at his phone. Then he drove to Elvia's apartment. She answered the door but didn't let him in. He's asleep. Can I? No. Her voice was steel. You don't get to wake him up to ease your guilt. You broke a promise. That has consequences. I'll apologize tomorrow. You think that fixes it? Michael had no answer. The next day, Michael showed up at the Tuesday pickup despite it being Wednesday. Waited outside the school until Darren emerged. "Can we talk?" Darren shrugged, got in the car. Michael drove to the usual coffee shop, ordered Darren's 2-sweet coffee, sat across from him in a booth. "I'm sorry," Michael started. "About yesterday. The board had an emergency, and it's fine. It's not fine. I promised to be there, and it's fine. I figured." Those 2 words cut deeper than any accusation could have. I figured. Not, I'm angry. Not, I'm disappointed. Just the quiet confirmation that Darren had expected exactly this. That Michael had proven every fear correct. "I should have been there," Michael said. "Yeah, it won't happen again." Darren looked at him with those 2 serious eyes. "You don't know that. Something always comes up. That's what the book says. Fathers always have a reason." "Darren, can you take me home? I have homework." The drive back was silent. When Darren got out, he didn't say goodbye. Just closed the door with careful precision and walked into his building without looking back. Michael sat in his car for 20 minutes. Then he called Margie. "Clear my calendar for the next 3 months. No meetings after 3 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. No evening commitments. If Tokyo has a crisis, they can handle it without me. Michael, you can't just watch me." He hung up. Michael had 12 years to make up for. He'd just confirmed Darren's worst fear. And this time, there might not be a third chance. But third chances aren't given. They're earned. One Tuesday at a time. One kept promise after another. Until "I figured" becomes "I know you'll be there." And Michael Johnson was ready to spend however long that took. The secret broke at a charity gala on a Saturday night in June. Michael wasn't even there. He'd skipped it, the annual Tech Leaders Foundation dinner, the kind of event he'd attended religiously for a decade, because Darren had invited him to a planetarium night. Elvia had brought Darren as her +1. The nonprofit she ran had received a small grant from the foundation. She'd debated not going, but the networking mattered for funding. Clayton saw them during cocktail hour. Elvia would later tell Michael it happened near the dessert table. Darren had been explaining something about orbital mechanics to another kid while Elvia got coffee. Clayton walked past, did a double take, stared at Darren with the kind of focus that made Elvia's instincts scream warnings. She watched him pull out his phone, take a photo, make 3 calls before he even left the ballroom. By Monday morning, the damage was done. Tech Titan's secret son revealed. TechCrunch, 6:47 a.m. Illegitimate heir to one bar empire. Business Insider, 7:23 a.m. Cheating scandal. Revisited. Who's the real villain? Page 6, 8:15 a.m. Michael's phone started ringing at 6:52 a.m. Margie, then his lawyer, then 3 board members, then reporters whose numbers he didn't recognize, but who somehow had his direct line. By 7:30 a.s., there were photographers outside Darren's school. Not celebrity photographers with respectful distance, paparazzi with long lenses and zero boundaries, shouting questions at 11-year-olds trying to get to class. "Darren, do you know who your father is? How much money are you getting? Did your mom keep you secret on purpose?" Elvia's nonprofit phone rang nonstop. Reporters posing as donors. Bloggers demanding statements. Trolls leaving voicemails that made her hands shake. Darren's face appeared on gossip sites, legally blurred to comply with minor privacy laws, but morally exposed for millions to speculate about. Michael saw the photos at 8:14 a.m. His son, walking into school with his head down and his backpack clutched too tight. Elvia's hand on his shoulder, her face set in an expression Michael recognized. Protective fury barely contained. He was in his car 8 minutes later. Called Elvia on the way. "I'm handling it," she said before he could speak. I'm handling it, Michael. She hung up. At 10:37 a.m., Elvia released a statement. Not through a PR firm or a lawyer or a carefully crafted press release. Through a simple email to the 3 largest outlets covering the story. Darren is my son. His father is Michael Johnson. We're co-parenting privately. That's the only statement there will ever be. Now leave my child alone. No apologies. No explanations. No justifications. Just boundaries drawn in permanent marker. Michael read it sitting in his office, with 20 missed calls lighting up his phone. And he realized something that should have been obvious 12 years ago. Elvia was the strongest person he'd ever known. He'd dismissed her as weak when she cried and begged him not to end things, had written her off as someone who broke under pressure. But she hadn't broken. She'd survived, rebuilt, raised a son alone, built a non-profit from nothing, and now stood between that son and a media circus without flinching. While Michael had spent 12 years hiding behind corporate structures and controlled narratives. The emergency board meeting was called for 2 p.m. Michael arrived 7 minutes late because he'd stopped at Darren's school first to make sure security was actually keeping photographers off campus. The conference room fell silent when he entered. 12 board members, 6 on video call, all wearing expressions that ranged from concerned to calculating. Clayton sat at the far end, looking pleased with himself in a way that made Michael's jaw tighten. Michael, the chairman started carefully, we need to discuss the media situation. There's nothing to discuss. Darren is my son. I'm handling it privately. Clayton leaned forward. This is a PR disaster. The stock dropped 3 points this morning. Investors are spooked. The narrative is out of control. The narrative, Michael said quietly, is that I have a son. That's not a disaster. That's a fact. A fact that raises questions about judgment. About what, Clayton? Michael's voice stayed perfectly calm, perfectly deadly. About my personal life 12 years ago? About mistakes I made? About being human? Michael needs to step back until this blows over, Clayton said, looking at the other board members. For the good of the company. Until what, Clayton? Michael interrupted. Until my son stops existing? Until I pretend he's inconvenient? Until I hide him to protect stock prices? We're thinking of shareholders, another board member tried. I'm thinking of my son, Michael said, for the first time. And if that cost me this company, then I never deserved it. The room went silent. Michael Johnson, who'd built this empire from code and ambition, who'd been the face of the company for 15 years, who'd never once put anything above quarterly earnings, just chose fatherhood over empire. I'm stepping down from daily operations, Michael continued. Sarah will take over as interim CEO. I'll remain on the board, but I'm done measuring my life in stock prices and market share. Clayton's face went red. That's career suicide. No, Michael said. It's the first smart decision I've made in 12 years. He stood. Meeting adjourned. The announcement went public at 4:47 p.m. Stock dipped 14% in after-hours trading. Headlines shifted. Michael Johnson steps down after secret son revealed. Tech CEO chooses fatherhood over fortune. The $140 million decision. What Johnson's exit means for investors. Analysts panicked. Business networks ran segments debating whether personal life should impact professional standing. Clayton gave an interview, calling it the most reckless decision he'd seen in 20 years. Michael didn't watch any of it. He drove to Elvia's apartment at 5:30 p.m. She answered, looking exhausted. Is he okay? Michael asked. He's scared, confused, angry that strangers know his name. Can I see him? He's in his room. Asked not to be bothered. Michael nodded. Tell him I'm sorry, and tell him I'm not going anywhere. He needs to hear that from you when he's ready. I'll wait. Elvia studied him. You really stepped down? Yeah. That's going to cost you. I know. Was it worth it? Michael thought about Darren waiting in a hallway for 40 minutes. I figured cutting deeper than rage ever could. About 11 years of Tuesday afternoons he'd never get back. Ask me again in 5 years, when he trusts me enough to need me. Something shifted in Elvia's expression. You're finally learning, she said quietly. That decision would cost him, but not in the ways Wall Street predicted. You know what no one tells you about second chances? They cost something, always. Michael gave up power to gain presence. And if you've ever had to choose between what looks successful and what actually matters, you know that choice isn't easy. Some of you watching this have made that choice. Some are still deciding. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because the women in our community, we know sacrifice isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And comment below if you've ever walked away from something that looked perfect but felt hollow. I see you, we all do. 6 months later, Michael Johnson's calendar looked nothing like the one that had defined his life for 20 years. 7:45 a.m. School drop-off. Darren actually got in the car without Elvia having to remind him. 3:15 p.m. Tuesday pickup. Darren now told him about his day without being asked. 5:30 p.m. Homework at Elvia's kitchen table. Michael didn't help, just sat across with his laptop, working quietly while Darren studied. 7:05 p.m. Reading, side by side. Still not together. Still not the same books, but closer now. Close enough that their shoulders sometimes touched. Weekends meant science museums, where Darren explained exhibits Michael pretended not to already understand. Planetarium shows, where Darren whispered corrections to the narrator's script. Library trips that stretched from morning into afternoon. Michael learned what normal smelled like. Darren's grape-scented eraser shavings scattered across homework pages. The specific chemical tang of whatever markers he used for science diagrams. The worn book smell that clung to his backpack from constant library visits. Elvia's jasmine tea at exactly 9 p.m. every night. She made it in the same chipped mug, added honey but never sugar, and drank it while reviewing grant applications at her kitchen table. The specific creak of Darren's bedroom door, the third hinge from the top, when he was pretending to be asleep but actually reading under his covers with a flashlight. Small details that meant everything. Details that proved Michael was present. The astronomy night happened on a Thursday, in early December. Darren mentioned it casually during Tuesday pickup. There's a public telescope event this Thursday at Riverside Park, if you're not busy. Not a question, not quite an invitation, somewhere in between. I'll be there, Michael said. Okay, it starts at 7. That was all. But it was the first time Darren had directly invited him to something. Thursday arrived cold and clear. The kind of winter night where the sky looks deeper than usual, and stars feel close enough to touch. Michael arrived at 6:52 p.m., 8 minutes early. Darren and Elvia were already there. 30 people scattered across the field. Families with children. Astronomy club members with expensive equipment. College students on dates, using stargazing as an excuse to stand close. Darren led Michael to a telescope set up near the edge of the group. You have to let your eyes adjust. First, Darren said, takes about 20 minutes. Don't look at your phone or you'll ruin it. Michael put his phone in his pocket. They stood in darkness, waiting for their vision to sharpen. Then Darren approached the telescope, adjusted the focus with practiced precision, stepped back. Look. Michael leaned in. Jupiter, clear and bright. 4 tiny points of light beside it. The Galilean moons, Darren said. That one's Ganymede, largest moon in our solar system. Bigger than Mercury. How do you remember all this? Michael asked. Mom got me books when I asked questions, Darren said simply. She always made space for my questions. The unspoken contrast hung in the air between them. Michael had never made space for anything but work. They looked at Mars, Saturn's rings, the Orion Nebula. Darren explained each one with the kind of passion that made his voice lose its careful control and become something younger, more open. Pay attention to what happens next, because this moment, it's when Darren decides to test something. Walking back to the parking lot, Elvia ahead of them, giving them space, Darren spoke quietly. Can I ask you something real? Always. Do you actually want to be here? Or do you just feel guilty? Michael stopped walking. Darren was almost his height now, 12 years old and already wearing shoes 2 sizes bigger than Elvia's. But this mattered. Michael knelt down, eye level. When I saw you in that airport, reading that book, I felt terror, Michael said, because I realized I'd missed 11 years of someone I should have known. And guilt? Yes, I feel crushing guilt. But that's not why I'm here. Then why? Because every Tuesday when I pick you up from school, you tell me one new thing you learned. And I go home, and I look it up, and I learn it too. Because I want to understand what you love. That's not guilt. I don't have a name for it yet. But it matters more than anything I've ever built. Darren didn't respond immediately. Just looked at Michael with those serious dark eyes that saw too much. Then, okay. Just okay. But as they walked to the car, Darren's hand brushed Michael's shoulder. Brief, almost accidental. A touch that lasted maybe half a second. Michael would remember it for the rest of his life. 2 weeks later, everything nearly fell apart. Tuesday, 2:47 p.m. Michael's phone rang while he was reviewing documents Sarah had sent about Q4 projections. Elvia's name on the screen. Darren had a panic attack at school, she said without preamble. I'm in the nurse's office. Can you come? Michael was in his car before she finished the sentence. The school nurse's office smelled like antiseptic, and the specific industrial soap all schools used. Fluorescent lights too bright. Vinyl-covered bed where Darren sat with his knees pulled to his chest. By the time Michael arrived, Darren had calmed. But he looked exhausted, hollowed out, like someone who'd run too far without stopping. He's been under a lot of stress, the nurse was saying. Family changes, media attention. I'm fine, Darren interrupted. You're not fine, baby, Elvia said gently. I just want things to be normal, Darren's voice cracked. I don't want people staring. I don't want photographers following us. I don't want kids asking me questions about money. I just want... He didn't finish. But Michael understood. Darren wanted the life he had before Michael appeared. The quiet life. The private life. The one where his biggest concern was science homework and library books, not headlines and stock prices and strangers with cameras. Michael felt something cold settle in his chest. What if his presence caused more harm than his absence ever did? What if showing up, the thing he'd been working so hard to do, was actually the problem? That night, Michael sat alone in his apartment and asked himself a question that had no easy answer. Should he walk away again? Not out of cowardice this time. Not out of anger or pride or corporate obsession, but out of love. To give Darren back the peace he'd had before a billionaire father complicated everything. Michael stared at that question until 3 a.m. And the answer, when it finally came, would come from the last person he expected. Michael typed the message at 11:34 p.m. Elvia, maybe this was a mistake. Maybe he's better off without me complicating things. His thumb hovered over send. He stared at those words for 20 minutes. Read them until they stopped making sense. Until the letters blurred into shapes that meant nothing and everything. Then he deleted them, character by character, watching each word disappear until the screen was blank again. Because walking away wasn't protecting Darren. It was protecting himself from the possibility of failing. And Michael had spent 12 years protecting himself. It hadn't made him happy. It had just made him alone. At 8:03 p.m. the next evening, Michael stood outside Elvia's apartment door, unannounced, unplanned, unprepared. He knocked. Elvia answered cautiously. She wore the exhausted expression of someone who'd spent 18 hours managing crisis aftermath, calming a panicked child, talking to school counselors, fielding questions from concerned teachers. "Michael, is he okay?" "He's in his room." "Can I—" Michael's voice caught. "Can I talk to him?" Elvia studied him. Her eyes moved across his face, like she was reading a language only she understood. Then she stepped aside. The hallway was narrow, 3 doors. The bathroom with the light that hummed. Elvia's bedroom with the door half open. And Darren's room at the end. The one with glow-in-the-dark star stickers scattered across the door in no particular constellation. Michael's footsteps sounded too loud against worn carpet. He stopped outside Darren's door, raised his hand to knock, stood there for 7 seconds, gathering courage he'd never needed in any boardroom. He knocked. "It's me." Silence. Long enough that Michael thought Darren wouldn't answer. Then, "Come in." Michael opened the door. Darren sat on the floor with his back against the bed. Not on the bed, not at his desk. On the floor, like he'd been sitting there for hours, and forgotten furniture existed. The book lay beside him. How to Find My Father. The same worn cover Michael had first seen at Gate 47 in an airport that felt like a lifetime ago. Michael closed the door behind him. Didn't sit on the bed. Didn't stand with adult height advantage. He sat on the floor across from Darren, eye level. "I'm not here to make promises," Michael said quietly, "or apologize again. I'm here to ask you something." "What?" "Do you want me to stay?" "Not what your mom wants. Not what the therapist thinks. What do you want?" Darren looked at the book, then at Michael. "I don't know." "That's fair. Everyone keeps asking me if I'm okay," Darren said. "But nobody asks what I actually want. So I'm asking." Silence filled the space between them. Not uncomfortable. Silence. Not hostile silence. Just the kind of quiet that holds weight. Outside, a car alarm went off somewhere distant. Elvia's footsteps moved past the door, then away. The bedroom clock ticked with mechanical precision. Darren picked at a loose thread on his jeans. "I finished the book," he finally said. "Yeah?" "It says," Darren's voice was careful, like he was choosing each word with precision. "It says sometimes fathers don't know how to stay, but sometimes they learn." He looked up. His eyes were wet but steady. Not crying, not breaking, just honest, in a way that made Michael's chest ache. "Are you staying, or are you learning?" The question hung in the air like a test Michael couldn't study for. He wanted to promise forever. Wanted to offer guarantees and certainties, and contracts signed in blood that he'd never miss another Tuesday, or break another promise, or let work matter more than this. But Darren didn't need promises. He needed truth. Michael didn't offer speeches. Didn't try to sound profound or rehearsed. He just said the only honest thing left, "I'm learning, and I want to learn with you." Darren stared at him, processing, evaluating, running calculations only 12-year-olds who'd learned not to trust words could perform. Then he nodded once. Small, certain. Okay. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution or redemption or any of the clean endings Michael had read about in books. It was permission. Permission to try, to fail, to try again, to learn through mistakes and small victories, measured in half-second touches and borrowed books. Darren didn't hug him. Not yet. But he reached for the book beside him. The worn paperback that had traveled 2 airports and libraries and bedroom floors. That had absorbed questions and fears and the quiet hope of a boy looking for someone who might stay. He held it out to Michael. "You can read it, if you want." Michael took it. The weight surprised him. Not heavy in mass, but heavy in meaning. 11 years of absence pressed between pages. Questions he should have asked. Answers he should have sought. He felt the cover's worn texture. Saw Darren's careful highlighting visible through thin pages. Notes in margins written in handwriting that had evolved from child's printing to adolescent cursive over months of reading and rereading. Remember when Michael saw this book in the airport and everything stopped? Now he holds it, and everything begins. "Thank you," Michael said. Darren nodded. They sat in silence for another 3 minutes. Not talking, not touching, just existing in the same space with less distance between them than there'd been an hour ago. Finally, Darren spoke. "I have homework." "Okay. But maybe you could stay? Mom's making dinner. She always makes too much." "I'd like that." Michael stood, extended his hand to help Darren up. Darren took it. And for the first time since that airport, Michael felt like he was holding something more valuable than any empire he'd ever built. This is the moment everything changes. Not because of money, not because of apologies, not because of grand gestures or perfectly timed speeches, because a child decided to risk hope one more time. And if you've ever been that child or that parent scrambling to deserve a second chance, then you know this feeling, the weight of it. Subscribe if you're still with me, because the ending, it's not what you expect. It's better. And comment if you've ever given someone permission to try again. Those decisions, they change entire family trees. Share this if someone you know needs to hear it. We're almost there. Stay with me. 1 year later, Michael Johnson was still a billionaire. The company had recovered. Stock prices climbed higher than they'd been before the media storm. Sarah had transitioned back to COO. Michael returned as CEO, but a different version of himself. The calendar that defined his life looked nothing like it used to. Tuesday, 3:15 p.m. School pickup, non-negotiable. Thursday, 6 p.m. Family therapy with Ruth, still going, probably always. Saturday mornings, planetarium trips, library visits, science museums. Sunday evenings, dinner at Elvia's. He brought groceries now. Michael knew which chair was his at Elvia's kitchen table. The wobbly one by the window that Darren had offered to fix 3 times, but never got around to. He knew Darren liked his grilled cheese cut diagonally, not straight down the middle, because the triangles taste better. He knew Elvia made jasmine tea at exactly 8:47 p.m. every night. That she added honey, never sugar. That she cradled the chipped blue mug in both hands while reviewing grant applications. He knew the specific creak of Darren's bedroom door meant the boy was pretending to sleep, but actually reading with a flashlight under covers. Small details that meant everything. The science fair happened on a Friday evening in March. Darren's project, calculating orbital trajectories of exoplanets. Michael arrived an hour early, front row, center seat. Wearing the tie Darren had picked out 2 weeks ago because it has Saturn on it, and that's hilarious for a billionaire. The gymnasium filled with parents holding phones, younger siblings running between displays, judges moving methodically from project to project with clipboards. When they announced third place, Michael's heart stopped for half a second. Darren Perry. The boy walked to the front, accepted his ribbon, and looked directly at Michael. Smiled. Small, but real. Not the practiced smile he gave strangers. Not the polite one he used with teachers. The genuine one that showed his slightly crooked front tooth and made his eyes crinkle at the corners. Afterward, in the parking lot, Darren held the ribbon like it weighed nothing and everything. "You came," he said. "I'll always come." "Don't promise always," Darren corrected gently. "Just promise tomorrow." Michael felt his throat tighten. "I promise tomorrow." Darren nodded. Then, unprompted, he hugged Michael. Brief. Awkward in the way teenage boys hug when they're still learning how, but genuine. Michael's learned consistency beats grand gestures. Presence beats promises. That small ribbon meant more than any Forbes cover ever had. The conversation with Elvia happened 3 months later. They weren't rushing back together, weren't dating, weren't trying to resurrect something that had died 12 years ago. They were rebuilding something different, slower, based on who they were now, not who they'd been. One Sunday evening, after Darren had gone to bed, Elvia poured Michael coffee in the kitchen. "I need to say something," she said. "Okay. Thank you for staying, even when he pushed you away, even when I made it hard." "You were protecting him." "I was," Elvia said quietly. "But I was also scared you'd hurt him, the way I hurt you." Michael set down his coffee. "We both broke things," he said. "We're both fixing them. That's enough." Elvia's eyes shimmered but didn't spill over. They weren't in love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But they were partners in the thing that mattered most, raising a boy who deserved better than their mistakes. 3 months after that, Darren packed for science camp. 2 weeks away. First time he'd be gone that long since Michael entered his life. Michael helped him organize. Darren had learned Michael was excellent at logistics, turning chaos into labeled lists. Toiletries in the side pocket. Socks rolled, not folded. Phone charger goes in the front so you don't forget it. "You're very specific about packing," Darren observed. "Years of business travel. You learn or you suffer." Darren laughed, then zipped his backpack. As he carried it to the door, Michael noticed the donation box Elvia kept near the entrance. On top, a worn paperback with a familiar cover. "How to Find My Father." Michael's breath caught. "You don't need it anymore?" Darren shrugged, looked at Michael with eyes that weren't quite as serious as they'd been a year ago. "I found you." 3 words. Michael didn't cry, but his throat closed, because those 3 words meant more than any quarterly earnings report, any stock price, any headline ever had. They meant he'd finally earned something that couldn't be bought. Later that night, alone in his penthouse, smaller now, less glass, more comfortable furniture chosen for function rather than aesthetic, Michael opened the donated book. He'd never actually read it, had only seen it from across airport lounges and in Darren's hands. The pages were filled with Darren's notes, highlighted passages about patience, about fathers who left and fathers who returned, about the difference between the two. On the last page, in Darren's careful handwriting that had evolved over months of questions, sometimes people leave, sometimes they return. Sometimes return is harder than leaving, but maybe that's the point. Michael closed the book, set it on his nightstand where he could see it every morning. Reminder of what mattered. Michael Johnson spent 12 years building an empire. He spent 1 year learning to be a father. The empire made him a billionaire. Fatherhood made him human. Justice wasn't delivered through revenge or public vindication. It came through a boy's 3-word sentence: "I found you." Where they are now. Darren, age 13. still obsessed with astronomy. Talks to Michael about college, MIT maybe, or Caltech. His panic attacks are less frequent. He's learned that fathers can stay if you let them try. Elvia expanded her nonprofit. 3 new locations. Serves 400 kids annually. Michael funds it anonymously. They're rebuilding trust. Slowly. Some nights they sit on her couch and watch cooking shows neither of them particularly likes, just existing in comfortable silence. Michael, still CEO. But leaves the office at 5 p.m. now. Hasn't missed a Tuesday pickup in 18 months. The board adapted. The company thrived. Turns out presence in one life doesn't require absence in another. It just requires priority. Because this time, Michael Johnson didn't just find his son. He stayed. And staying? That was the hardest billion he ever earned. If you made it to the end of this story, you're my people. The women who understand that redemption isn't loud, it's quiet, persistent, uncomfortable. Michael learned what too many people refuse to accept. You can't buy back time, but you can earn new time. If this story moved you, if you've ever had to learn how to stay instead of run, subscribe to this channel. Because every week we tell stories about women and the families they built, protected, and sometimes had to rebuild. We tell stories about men who finally learned, about children who decided to risk hope, and about the silent victories nobody sees, but everybody feels. Comment below. What's one thing you wish someone had stayed for? I'll read every single one. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to show up.